938 Live. This is Talkback.
Are you sick of holding your child's hand through the academic rat race? Well, registration for primary school started last week, and I know a lot of parents of 6-year-olds across the country who are no doubt anxiously watching the number of spots available at their school of choice, and they're doing this very closely over the next few weeks. But those who have chosen homeschooling, well, they'll clearly not have to go through this. The number is small, though. Let's say that up front. On average, about 50 children in Singapore opt out of the school system every year to be homeschooled. Now, people choose homeschooling for various reasons. The ability to give their children individualized attention being one of them. The flexibility to let their kids learn at their own speed and beyond the confines of the syllabus. Also to impart stronger values in some cases. Now, those who want to homeschool their kids have to apply to the Education Ministry for an exemption from compulsory education. They have to provide details of their home curriculum. Also, they have to show that they have the resources and the qualifications to educate their children full time. So it's not for everyone. The number of rejections in applications, though, has been low over the years. It's been below 1%. Homeschoolers must sit for the PSLE, and about 30 to 40 do so every year.
Now, homeschoolers here are a close-knit group. Now, for instance, there is in Singapore the Homeschool Group, which is a social media group that only accepts parents of actual homeschoolers at primary level. They have about 400 members. Counting other groups for preschoolers and teenagers, there are also close to 1,000 members today. The families organize group lessons or various subjects from public speaking to mathematics, and they even have their own sports day. So, can homeschooling take off in Singapore really in a bigger way? Some might say our education system delivers results. So, is there really a need for homeschooling? Others might say, well, breaking away from the rat race could actually enhance a child's learning. But what do you think? Call us on 669-11938, or you can start, of course, talking to us on Facebook, official 938 Live.
Joining us today is Associate Professor Jason Tan from the National Institute of Education's Policy and Leadership Studies Department. Good morning, Jason. Welcome in. Now, first of all, Jason, some of the benefits of homeschooling as cited by parents are the ability to give their kids individualized attention, the flexibility to learn at their own speed, of course, beyond the confines of the syllabus, to impart stronger religious values as well, and to cater to the needs of kids with special needs and learning disabilities. To what extent would you say the mainstream education system does provide for some of these needs?
Well, dealing with your first point, individualized attention, I think it's important to bear in mind that the kind of education system that most countries have is mass education. And as the name suggests, mass education systems try to cater for groups rather than for individuals. And the reason why many parents seek out private tutoring is precisely because they want a more individualized kind of attention for their child. When it comes to stronger religious values, in the case of Singapore, our mainstream schools, most of them are secular in nature.
But we do have some religious-based ones.
That's right. And they also have to cater to the needs of non-believers, if you like, in their midst in schools. When it comes to special needs and learning disabilities, I think it's crucial to point out that the compulsory education legislation that is currently in place specifically excludes children with special needs and learning disabilities.
But there are SPED schools in Singapore.
That's right. But these students are allowed exemption from
compulsory education.
That's right.
Let's talk about some research on the outcomes that we can expect. I know research is sorely lacking on, say, academic outcomes of homeschooled children, but what do you know about it, based on the experience of other countries as well?
What I know about the situation in the United States and the United Kingdom is that to date there hasn't been much rigorous, statistically based research on homeschoolers and their educational outcomes. Despite the growing phenomenon of homeschooling and the more well-established homeschooling setups that we have in these two countries, there still isn't all that much that we do know definitively about the impact of homeschooling and whether students really go on to higher education, for instance.
Should more be done? Should more research be done, you think? I mean, is this
definitely
a viable option that needs to be considered?
Oh,
perhaps?
definitely. I think, if nothing else, homeschooling provides all of us with a valuable lens, if you like, with which we can view mainstream schooling. Does it make sense? Why are these parents deliberately choosing the home rather than mainstream schools? Their reasons, I think, are valuable because they allow us the opportunity to really examine whether mainstream schooling does in fact live up to all of its claims.
One of my friends who actually did homeschool his child said one of the contentions is that it's felt that these children are not exposed to other children enough, and that they don't have this sociability factor that's worked into it. But I mean, don't they have opportunities to meet other kids outside of that as well?
I think it's important for us to realize that homeschooling isn't as lonely an enterprise as it might seem at first glance.
Yeah.
These parents, as you correctly pointed out just now, have their own established social networks.
Right.
And in fact, it's even possible in this day and age to do online, real-time conferencing with people from practically any part of the world.
Absolutely.
For example, similarly inclined parents in different countries, they can even access online learning resources. It's important also to realize that when we talk about the mainstream schools, there have been concerns raised that some schools have a rather narrow socioeconomic intake.
Which is why the question of social diversity has been making the headlines lately, and steps are being taken to increase the level of social diversity in top schools, for instance, so on and so forth. Do you think more needs to be done in that arena when we talk about mainstream schooling, since we're comparing the two?
Yes. So, as I was saying earlier, looking at homeschooling provides us with that valuable lens with which we can look at mainstream schooling better. So I think it's undeniable that mainstream schooling, despite all its many benefits, still has a long way to go in providing a really, if you like, holistic and all-rounded sort of development.
Even though that is what the dialogue has been about, to make sure that you develop the whole child holistically, and I think the Education Ministry can't stress that enough. But are the steps being taken adequate? And what more do you think can be done in terms of mainstream schooling? Is homeschooling an option that should be considered? Have you ever considered it as a parent for your child? Call us on 669-11938. Benny Tay makes this point on our Facebook page, alluding to something we just discussed. He says going to school is not just about academic achievement. It also provides our kids a chance to meet and grow up with peers of the same age and blend into society. Homeschooling might deprive kids to nurture of the chance to nurture their communication skills. And with technology impeding so much of our daily lives, homeschooling might make it even worse. Would it isolate the individual? We have heard from some parents who have homeschooled their kids. Channel News Asia did an interview with one couple, and they said, you know what, the social media groups that we have, these co-ops that we have, where the kids interact with other homeschooled kids and participate in workshops on public speaking, on math, even a sports day that they have organized for the kids, that really does help in terms of socialization. And also our expert in the studio, Jason Tan from NIE, just mentioned the online communities that kids can interact with. So if that is what your concern is, we want to hear from you as well. If you know someone who has homeschooled their kids, call us 669-11938.
I think people need to know also that to apply for their children to be homeschooled, it's quite a long process as well, right? Jason, would you be able to talk us through, what are some of the things that parents need to prove to MOE?
Well, I'm not really all that familiar on a first-hand basis with the procedures, but I would imagine that parents would have to show evidence that they have the resources, that they have access to the expertise needed to provide homeschooling for their children.
They do have to show details of their home curriculum and, as you said, Jason, resources, the qualifications also to educate their children full time. And rightly so. I mean, if you're looking out for the welfare of the child, all these things need to be in place. Obviously, this isn't for everyone, because not everyone has the means to teach their children on their own. I know of one couple who has done this, and one of them is a teacher, actually, in the mainstream education system, and he does this part-time for his child, homeschools his kid part-time. So it's for a very niche group of people, don't you think?
That's right. I think it will continue to remain very much a niche option, a very minority option.
Can it be seen as elitist, for that matter?
Well, I think ultimately it's a very private decision on the part of the parents. And I think it's not a frivolous, it's not an impulsive decision. It's very much a deliberate and an informed choice on their part. I don't think they've arrived at this decision just overnight. They've given the whole matter very... Right. Exactly.
Now, in the States, I've read research that shows some of the reasons that people decide on homeschooling for their kids could be that they are quite disillusioned with the public education system, which tends to be very exam-based. And homeschooling allows them to give their kids a different outlook on life, more a focus on their skills and resources rather than on their ability to take exams. Now, the Singapore education system has also been criticized for that, being very exam-based, and people who are good at taking exams tend to excel more than anyone else. To what extent do you think that also might fuel the more people, in fact, to think about homeschooling as an option in the future?
Well, the international research on homeschooling indicates that homeschooling parents have a diversity of personal beliefs, methods and approaches. For some of them, it's very much about their own child's uniqueness and distinctive individuality. And they feel that in a very mass education system, it's not really possible for teachers who deal with large classes to give that sort of individuality sufficient scope to develop. There are also parents who are concerned about, for instance, phenomena such as bullying, whether their children are enjoying school. They may have had children, older children, for example, who have had unhappy experiences in school. And of course, as I said earlier, it's quite obvious from the heavy reliance on private tutoring in Singapore that a lot of parents feel that mainstream schools still can't provide enough individualized attention for their children.
That heavy reliance on tuition, that's something we're going to be discussing in just a moment as well. You can call us 669-11938. Talkback continues in just a while. Thanks for joining us on 938 Live, talking today about whether or not you are sick of holding your child's hand through the academic rat race. A lot of people say school is what you mean for it to be, yeah? So how you decide to let your child navigate the academic rat race has a lot to do with your child's enjoyment of school. Well, other parents have decided to take it to a new level. They're homeschooling their kids. The number is still small, though. On average, about 50 kids in Singapore opt out of the primary school system every year to be homeschooled. What do you think of this concept? Call us on 669-11938.
Okay, we've got Mr. Tan on the line. Hi, Mr. Tan.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, our education changes is really good, and but what I want to say a few suggestions which can actually hopefully they will think about it. That every child, if you give a child 1 week, each child 1 week, in 30 weeks, every child will be given the opportunity in class to lead on certain things, right? In other words, leadership quality is about giving them the opportunity. Okay, you just nominate anyone and say, okay, today I want you to lead and tell us, what is your project, and tell us, how you're going to do a presentation and things like that, and give them the opportunity to speak in front of the class. These are all leadership qualities, and they have to work together, and they have to get to know each other, and these are all qualities which the education ministry must develop. No point having scholars who don't know anything and blame the whole world for their problems. So the thing is, leadership quality is about being able to garner support, be able to get information, right? What they call getting your facts right, and then discuss and come up with a good solution. Make a presentation in class.
Sure, Mr. Tan. Your next point, please.
And the next point is also the humility of cleaning the schools, and these are all part of growing up and education is not just about a paper qualification. I don't agree with that. But they're working in the right direction. I'm glad the minister is doing it.
Sure, thank you very much for that, Mr. Tan. In fact, character and citizenship education would take care of that. He mentioned a sense of humility, leadership quality, so on and so forth. I think at the base of it, he's saying giving every child an equal opportunity to excel. Some people feel that the education system works more in favor of kids who are already excelling. What about the kids who are not? Well, if you go and look into the schools, I think you'll see that there are many schools out there who are managing to turn kids around, help them exploit their natural abilities as well. But we'll talk more about this in just a moment. Stay with us on 938 Live. Thanks for joining us on 938 Live. Today talking all about an alternative means of getting your child educated in Singapore. If you are sick of holding your child's hand through the academic rat race in mainstream schools, perhaps homeschooling is an option. Now, we know that not everyone can do this. Indeed, homeschooling is only for a small group of students at this point in Singapore. On average, only about 50 kids opt out of the primary school system every year to be homeschooled. Now, the parents choose it for various reasons: the ability to give their children individualized attention, the flexibility to learn at their own speed, and also perhaps to impart stronger values. Those who want to homeschool their children, by the way, have to apply to the Education Ministry for an exemption from compulsory education. You've got to provide details of your home curriculum and show that you have the resources and the qualifications as well to educate your kids full time. Call us on 669-11938 if you have a thought on this. Should this type of an alternative be supported by society, even if not everyone can do it? We're joined today by Associate Professor Jason Tan from the NIE, the National Institute of Education's Policy and Leadership Studies Department. Now, Jason, there have been debates over the years in the US where several million are homeschooled about the merits of homeschooling and even its legality. Why is this such a contentious subject? Although I do understand it is now legal in all states.
Yes, I guess a lot of the objections to homeschooling revolve around firstly, the supposed lack of resources, the supposed lack of specialist knowledge, and something that we mentioned earlier, socialization.
The socialization issue, I think, would bother many people, even though you pointed out that, yes, these parents have their own little co-ops. They do mix around with people, even overseas, via online means. But some take their kids out of the school environment, maybe because the child has problems socializing in that mainstream school environment. So isolating them further, or only letting them socialize with a select group of individuals, wouldn't that damage them to some extent in the long term?
Or spoil them,
And after they go out into the world of work, where you have to deal with people in sometimes an uncontrolled environment, it might be rather difficult, wouldn't it be?
Well, I think many parents who homeschool their children feel that it is their primary parental responsibility to inculcate sound values at a young age in their children. They think that they are best placed to do this. If I can, at this stage, bring in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. Article 26, para 3 states quite categorically, and I quote, "Parents have a prior right to choose the kinds of education that shall be given to their children," end quote. So you can see there that even the United Nations way back then had already pointed out very clearly that it's up to the parents to make the key decisions for their children's education. In this regard, I would like also for us to consider the fact that the terms education and schooling are not the same thing.
Right. Okay.
Okay, explain that difference.
Well, a lot of people, I think, get confused between the two terms. They automatically jump to the conclusion that compulsory education means compulsory schooling in a mainstream school. And that, of course, is forgetting the fact that education takes place in lots of other places beyond mainstream schools. And these parents, the homeschooling parents that is, what they are doing is simply holding on to the responsibility for educating their children instead of, like the vast majority do, instead of delegating that responsibility to mainstream schools.
Well, what do you think? Is that an option you would ever consider? We'd like to know on 669-11938. Now, at this time, what is the level of national oversight on homeschooling in Singapore?
Well, as you pointed out earlier, these parents have to apply on an individual basis for exemption. And I think a lot of people aren't familiar with the fact that compulsory education legislation in Singapore only covers the first 6 years of schooling.
So primary 1 to 6.
That's right. So after that 6th year has ended, these homeschooling parents are under no legal obligation to continue applying for exemption for their children.
Should there be more national oversight, do you think?
Well, if the state becomes too intrusive, then
what would be the point?
Yes, of homeschooling in the first place.
To what extent would you say the Singapore education system actually does deliver the results that most parents would want, and therefore homeschooling actually might remain on the fringes for a very long time to come?
I think we need to remember that these homeschooling parents are very much aware of the benefits of mainstream schooling. As I said earlier, it's not a decision, an uninformed decision.
It's not impulsive,
yeah. Yes, and could it be that some of these parents are precisely choosing to homeschool their children in order to avoid what they regard as the overly competitive nature of schooling in Singapore?
Now, you did say earlier that the homeschooling landscape does allow us to look at mainstream education through a different lens. So let's talk about mainstream education. It is rapidly changing to develop children holistically, and we have seen some results. Our students, for instance, do very well on international assessments as well. However, many are concerned about the pressure of standardized tests. There is the tuition culture to contend with, something you've mentioned several times today as well. Also, you've said before that parents, as the education system evolves, parents might end up playing a more significant role in their child's education. But we could also see a greater social inequality because some families clearly have more resources than others. In fact, you've said that instead of having a meritocracy, increasingly what we have in Singapore could be a parentocracy. To what extent would you say that all these factors could lead to more being disillusioned by mainstream education?
Well, what I meant by a parentocracy is precisely this. In an ideal meritocracy, one's home background doesn't matter, one's race, one's gender, and so on. All these things do not matter at all. All that matters are the individual child's ability, the individual child's efforts or hard work. But I think it's rather obvious to all of us who know what's going on in Singapore, for example, that more and more what we are seeing is that the parents' efforts, the parents' resources, the parents' wishes are coming into play when determining a child's educational outcomes.
Well, if we talk about homeschooling in this context, to what extent is this also a parentocracy of a different sort?
Well, homeschooling is a very direct example of parents taking a highly active role. Because I guess many mainstream parents out there would be happy to have their children in a mainstream school together with private tutoring. So homeschooling parents are taking it one step higher and choosing to take on the primary responsibility themselves.
Let's bear in mind that research in the US does show that many opt out of the paper chase so that they can equip their kids with a different outlook on life, a focus on skills and resources, not just on the ability to pass exams. So if some parents feel that their kids are disadvantaged in an exam-oriented environment, they have also chosen homeschooling. I'm talking here about this in the context of the United States, where about 2 to 3% are homeschooled. Let's see what you have to say about this. Mr. Lee joins us now.
Hi, Mr. Lee.
Hello, yes, morning.
Good morning. You're on the air, Mr.
I think
Lee.
that homeschool should be implemented because when the children they impart the not the rat race to the children, but impart the culture of the house. And if they want to socialize, they can go to the church. The church can have the kind of socialize. So now is that they go to school, they tuition, and then they go. The rat race is continue, and then the competition is there.
Do you have kids, Mr. Lee?
Yeah, I have 3.
And do they all go to mainstream schools, or?
Yeah, they go to mainstream school and they spend a few $1,000s on tuition.
Ah, wow. Okay. That was something that our expert mentioned as well. You know, all this money spent on tuition, some parents might just choose to homeschool their kids, might as well do that, right? However, why isn't homeschooling for you, even though you speak about it in very positive terms?
Homeschool, you have an advantage and have disadvantage. The advantage is that the mother and the parents can impart the direct knowledge to the student or the son or the daughter. But the main thing is that the father and mother, both of them are working. So there's actually lack of time to impart all this knowledge to them.
Indeed. So there are limitations to all of this. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, for calling in with that thought. As we said earlier, Jason, indeed, not everyone can do this. And one would think that only parents with resources and qualifications will be able to do this. Is this another elite class of its own?
Well, I would prefer to think of it as a very heavy responsibility on the part of these parents. They've got to do it full time, and they can't shift the blame to anybody else. But they've got only themselves to blame if you look at it that way. So I don't think it's a decision that we should brush aside lightly.
Now, the Education Ministry does seem to be making changes in terms of moving away from, say, too much of a focus on exams. School rankings have been abolished, yet there is always this race for a limited number of places in brand name schools. What do you think is it going to take for society to take a deep breath, enable students to grow up in an environment where learning is fun, not just competitive and stressful in terms of mainstream education, so that parents don't feel like, I have to spend thousands of dollars on tuition, and some might say, I'm going to opt out of the mainstream school system as a result of that?
Yeah. One rather prominent feature of a meritocracy, such as the kind we have in Singapore, is precisely that students will leave school with unequal outcomes. Supposedly, the best, the most able do better than those who can't succeed that much. And therefore, many parents out there will do all it takes to ensure their child has a competitive advantage vis-a-vis other children.
Even when it comes to schemes that are aimed at recognizing their child's other talents, not just academic talents. We've got the direct schools admission scheme, for example, that deals with that, that helps to actually broaden our definitions of success. So is this really a question of the education system being flawed, or of parents and their perceptions being flawed, where they turn everything into some sort of competitive race?
See, that's precisely what I was talking about just now. The fact that many parents see education as a rat race. The need to ensure that their children get ahead, do better than other people's children. And because of that, I think in large part, many of the education policies that have been rolled out tend to be interpreted along those lines.
So perhaps you have taken that decision to get out of the rat race. Is there merit for society to be supportive of such alternatives, Jason? Alternatives like homeschooling?
If we believe that parents have the prime responsibility for their children's welfare and well-being, then we have to no choice but to respect their decision to undertake homeschooling.
Thank you very much, Jason, for joining us today. Jason Tan is an associate professor at the National Institute of Education's Policy and Leadership Studies Department. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for your phone calls today. You can continue, of course, to talk to us on Official 938 Live on Facebook.